Danny Russo, an undercover FBI agent, infiltrated one of the most dangerous mafia families in the world. But as he dug deeper into Vincent Bellino's empire, he found himself trapped between loyalty and survival. With Tony Marino watching his every move and a deadly cartel deal on the line, can Danny survive his darkest mission yet, or will his cover be blown in the final, deadly showdown? In the late 1980s, the FBI found itself facing an unprecedented challenge. Organized crime in the United States had spread like wildfire, with mafia families from New York to Chicago weaving intricate webs of influence that extended far beyond U.S. borders. The mafia was establishing ties with other criminal organizations in Europe, South America, and Asia, forming a powerful network that dealt in drugs, arms, and influence. As the mafia grew stronger, so did the FBI's frustrations. They had spent years gathering intelligence and making arrests, yet the mafia's reach continued to expand, slipping through their fingers time and time again. To combat this elusive threat, the FBI devised a daring plan. They would send spies into the mafia. These would be undercover agents, each carefully chosen, trained, and given a new identity to infiltrate the world of organized crime. The goal was to gather intel from within, targeting high-ranking members, key transactions, and, above all, the alliances that the mafia was forming with international crime syndicates. Each spy would need to live a double life, navigating the violent world of the mafia while secretly reporting back to the FBI. Among these agents was Danny Russo, a former soldier with a complex background. Danny had grown up in a tough neighborhood, giving him a natural familiarity with people who operated outside the law. He was resourceful, calm under pressure, and had the kind of demeanor that allowed him to blend into any crowd. His time in the military gave him a set of survival skills that few agents possessed, making him the perfect candidate for a high-stakes mission like this one. Danny's assignment was to infiltrate the circle of Vincent Bellino, a notorious figure in organized crime. Despite his nickname, Vincent was anything but a saint. He was known for his charisma and intelligence, as well as his ruthlessness. He had been rising in the ranks for years, and was now one of the mafia's most powerful players, controlling a network of drug trafficking and illegal arms deals that spanned multiple continents. Vincent was a master of deception, maintaining a respectable front with legitimate business ventures, but his true operations remained hidden, wrapped in layers of secrecy. Danny's first task was to find a way into Vincent's circle. He took on the identity of a small-time hustler, someone looking to make it big but not yet powerful enough to be a threat. It took months of careful maneuvering, making connections with low-level associates and earning small amounts of trust. Danny knew he couldn't rush this. If he moved too quickly, he would raise suspicions and possibly endanger himself. But if he played his cards right, he might just get close enough to gather the information the FBI needed. Over time, Danny's strategy worked. He slowly gained Vincent's trust, proving himself loyal in small ways, completing menial tasks, and staying under the radar. He observed everything, learning the inner workings of Vincent's operation and the personalities of the people around him. He noted Vincent's associates, men who had been loyal for years and newcomers who were also trying to prove themselves. It was a balancing act, blending in while gathering information, but Danny was committed to the role. The stakes were high. Danny knew that the smallest slip could lead to disaster. The mafia was notorious for dealing harshly with anyone they suspected of betrayal, and Vincent was known for his paranoia. Rumors circulated about Vincent's brutal methods of dealing with spies and traitors, and Danny could feel the tension every time he interacted with him. Yet, he also knew that getting close to Vincent was essential. The FBI believed Vincent held the key to a vast network that connected U.S.-based mafia families with criminal organizations around the world. The information Danny could gather would be invaluable, potentially exposing powerful figures and dismantling international operations. Each day, Danny sank deeper into his undercover identity. He became accustomed to the constant risk, to the double life he was leading. But as he got closer to Vincent, he also began to see the challenges of the task ahead. This mission was unlike anything he had faced before, and he could sense that his journey into the world of Mafia Spies would test him in ways he could never have imagined. After months of careful work, Danny Russo successfully infiltrated Vincent Bellino's inner circle. His early assignments were small and seemingly insignificant, but they gave him a valuable look at the Mafia's operations. He began by running errands, picking up packages, delivering messages, and doing minor favors for Vincent's trusted men. Each task was a test. Danny knew he was being watched, assessed for loyalty, reliability, and most importantly, silence. The Mafia valued loyalty above all else, and any slip-up or show of curiosity could be deadly. As time passed, Danny started to understand the Mafia's complex web of relationships. Vincent's organization was much more than a group of criminals. It was a brotherhood, held together by tradition, loyalty, and the careful management of power. Every member had a role, and each role was tied to another. Danny observed Vincent's closest associates and began learning the subtle hierarchies and unwritten rules. There was Tony, Vincent's fierce enforcer, a man with a brutal reputation and quick temper. Tony was loyal to Vincent to a fault, acting as his right hand, the one who took care of problems. Then there was Luca, the smooth-talking negotiator with connections to overseas contacts, who seemed more interested in making deals than getting his hands dirty. Gradually, Danny's assignments grew more significant. He was tasked with overseeing money transfers, managing inventory for hidden warehouses, and coordinating meetings with Vincent's associates. The pressure intensified as he took on these larger responsibilities. Any mistake could attract suspicion, so Danny had to execute each job perfectly. His calm demeanor and ability to remain unflappable under stress helped him win favor among Vincent's men, but inside he was always on edge. He was juggling multiple lives, constantly aware of the fine line he walked between loyalty and betrayal. The deeper he went, the more dangerous his position became. Danny began to notice how the Mafia kept everyone in check. It wasn't just about loyalty, it was about power and fear. Vincent had a way of maintaining control by keeping people close yet always slightly uncertain. He'd extend small gestures of trust, then quickly remind them of what happened to those who betrayed him. Danny saw glimpses of Vincent's darker side, the ruthless lengths he would go to in order to protect his empire. It wasn't long before he realized he, too, was being watched and tested, just like everyone else. During one of his assignments, Danny uncovered something that shook him. In the back room of a high-stakes poker game Vincent had arranged, he overheard two of Vincent's men talking about a recent loyalty test. This was a term Vincent used for sending certain associates on missions with hidden traps, ensuring they would either prove their loyalty or expose themselves as untrustworthy. Danny's heart pounded as he listened, knowing he could easily be next. He became hyper-aware, scrutinizing every task for hidden dangers, and became more cautious around Vincent's closest allies. Paranoia crept in, but he knew he had to stay focused. At the same time, Danny's undercover role demanded he act as if he trusted those around him. He had to maintain a delicate balance, appearing confident and capable while guarding every word and action. The Mafia valued loyalty to the point of obsession, and Danny had to prove he was just as devoted. As weeks turned into months, Danny developed a routine, living a double life as both a Mafia associate and a federal agent. He kept meticulous notes for the FBI, documenting Vincent's dealings, names of associates, and hints of the organization's larger network. But his actions were cloaked in secrecy. Every time he met with his FBI contact to pass on information, he risked his life. Despite his training and careful planning, Danny began feeling the strain of the constant deception. It was impossible to truly relax, to let his guard down even for a moment. The walls seemed to close in, and Danny found himself growing suspicious of everyone, knowing that any one of Vincent's men could be watching him, waiting for a slip. At night, alone in his small apartment, he would review his notes and wonder how much longer he could continue the act. Yet he knew that the closer he got to Vincent, the greater the reward. The FBI needed proof of Vincent's operations, particularly his international connections and money trails. Danny realized that he was one of the few people close enough to gather this information, and his position within Vincent's organization gave him a unique vantage point. But he also knew that every day spent in Vincent's circle increased the chances that his cover would be blown. The thrill of undercover work was overshadowed by the relentless pressure, the mental toll of living in a world where loyalty was a life or death matter. Danny's task was to become invisible, to blend in so completely that he left no trace of his true identity. But as he became more entangled in Vincent's world, he wondered how much of himself he'd have to sacrifice to see the mission through to the end. The line between his real self and his undercover identity blurred, leaving Danny uncertain of who he was becoming and how far he could go without losing himself entirely. One night, at an exclusive party hosted by Vincent Bellino, Danny found himself faced with an unexpected breakthrough and an equally terrifying realization. The gathering was held in the back room of an upscale club, where only Vincent's most trusted associates were allowed. The party was lavish, with expensive drinks and discreet security guarding every entrance. Undercover as a trusted associate, Danny had now been in Vincent's inner circle long enough to be considered part of the family. Though he still felt the pressure of every interaction and every sideways glance. The stakes had never felt higher, and Danny's mind was constantly racing to pick up on any hidden threat. At the party, Danny observed Vincent and his men discussing a new, high-stakes deal. Vincent's organization had been struggling to smuggle arms internationally due to increased scrutiny from law enforcement, so he'd devised a new strategy. He planned to collaborate with a foreign syndicate known for its efficient smuggling routes. If successful, the operation would secure an influx of weapons and make Vincent's organization one of the most powerful in the underworld. The details were shared in hushed tones, but Danny listened carefully, mentally recording every word. He knew this information was exactly what the FBI needed. However, as he continued gathering intel, Danny realized that he was becoming emotionally entangled in his double life. He had spent so much time with Vincent and his associates that he began to feel a sense of familiarity, even loyalty toward some of them, despite knowing the truth about their activities. This was especially true with Maria, Vincent's younger sister, who had recently returned to town. She had no knowledge of her brother's criminal dealings and worked as a schoolteacher, staying far away from the violence and secrecy of Vincent's world. Her presence at the party surprised Danny, as Vincent had always kept her out of his personal affairs. But she had attended out of loyalty to her brother, oblivious to the people and secrets surrounding her. Danny found himself drawn to Maria's warmth and kindness, traits he rarely encountered in Vincent's world. His undercover life had isolated him, and Maria represented a glimpse of the life he had left behind, a life untainted by crime and betrayal. This unexpected attachment unsettled him, forcing him to confront the conflict between his duty as a federal agent and his own emotional vulnerability. His mission required him to remain objective and emotionally detached, yet he found himself genuinely caring for Maria's well-being, which made his role even harder to play. The strain of keeping up his undercover act was beginning to show. The stress and sleepless nights were taking a toll, and Danny's mind often wandered to thoughts of what might happen if he ever failed or made a mistake. He started to question his own decisions, scrutinizing each choice he made, knowing that any wrong step could expose him. The constant need for deception was exhausting. Danny felt himself slipping, the tension making him less focused than he knew he should be. One evening, during a high-stakes arms negotiation, Danny slipped up slightly something as minor as a hesitant answer to a direct question. It was the kind of moment he could normally recover from, but his guard was down and he felt a jolt of panic, realizing how close he'd come to revealing his true purpose. He noticed Tony's piercing stare, eyes studying him with a flash of suspicion. Fortunately, Vincent laughed off the moment, but Danny could tell he would need to be even more careful. Tony's suspicious glance stayed with him, a reminder that he was never truly safe within Vincent's organization. Any lapse in concentration, any moment of weakness, could be the one that cost him his life. Danny's conflicted emotions toward Maria and his mounting anxiety about his undercover role forced him to confront the sacrifices he was making. He was leading a life built on lies, infiltrating people's lives and betraying their trust. It was all part of his mission, but each passing day made it harder to remember who he really was. This life of deception and danger was changing him, and he feared that he was becoming more like the people he was trying to take down. He knew he had to press on, both for the FBI and for the justice that his mission aimed to achieve. But his dual life was tearing him apart, putting him on a path that felt unsustainable. Now he had access to the critical information the FBI needed, but he also felt increasingly vulnerable. The realization that he'd become emotionally entangled in his role, drawn in by Maria's innocence and his unexpected attachment to the people around him, left him shaken. With his cover intact but his resolve wavering, Danny knew he was on the brink of either a major breakthrough or a devastating collapse. His role had grown more complicated than he ever anticipated, and each day he wrestled with the question of how far he could go without losing his true self in the process. The stakes were only getting higher, and he was walking an increasingly narrow line between loyalty to his mission and the emotional bonds he couldn't deny were forming. As Danny Russo's role in Vincent Bellino's organization grew deeper, the danger surrounding him intensified. The FBI, keenly aware of Danny's valuable position, increased their demands for updates on Vincent's international arms smuggling deals. They pressed Danny for details about the overseas syndicates involved and the meeting points of the planned shipments, and they expected him to pass along this information despite the risks he faced. Danny had started to feel the heavy weight of isolation. His only real contact with the outside world was through these secret meetings with his FBI handler. Each meeting was filled with intense discussions and tight deadlines, a stark reminder of how high the stakes were and how little room there was for error. One night, Danny managed to intercept a coded message about an upcoming exchange of arms between Vincent's group and a South American cartel. This exchange was crucial, and the FBI believed it would open doors to unraveling Vincent's international ties. But Danny faced a problem. The exchange was set to take place at an undisclosed warehouse, and only a handful of Vincent's closest men were to be trusted with the location. This meant Danny had to earn his place among them, a feat that required him to gain an unprecedented level of trust from Vincent. Danny's opportunity to prove his loyalty came when Vincent unexpectedly ordered him to oversee a smaller transaction. It involved the pickup of a substantial cash payment in exchange for a sample shipment of arms, a transaction that Vincent was using to test Danny's trustworthiness and competence. Danny understood that if he carried out this task without mistakes, he would likely be invited to join Vincent's inner circle for the more significant exchange. The FBI was counting on him, and he couldn't afford a single misstep. The operation was nerve-wracking, but Danny remained calm as he executed Vincent's orders. He met with the buyers, secured the payment, and transported the sample shipment without attracting any suspicion. He documented every detail in his mind, taking mental notes of the players involved, their vehicles, and any identifying information he could pass along to the FBI. The mission was successful, and Vincent appeared pleased, offering Danny a rare nod of approval that seemed to solidify his position within the organization. Vincent's newfound trust in Danny came with a catch. Tony, Vincent's enforcer, continued to harbor suspicions. Tony was a man who could read people well, and he had started to observe Danny with greater scrutiny, his eyes lingering a little too long, his questions sharper than usual. Danny sensed that Tony was actively looking for any sign of deception, waiting for Danny to slip up. Danny knew that if Tony ever discovered his true identity, there would be no escape. The Mafia was relentless when dealing with betrayal, and Tony was ruthless in enforcing Vincent's brand of justice. The tension became nearly unbearable as Danny prepared for the arms exchange, which would be the ultimate test. He had earned a place in Vincent's trusted circle for the mission, and he was expected to attend a meeting at a remote location, a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of town. Danny was on edge, aware that his every move would be scrutinized, not only by Tony but by all of Vincent's closest men. He was determined to gather as much information as possible for the FBI, but he was also realistic about the risks. He had reached a point of no return, a place where his cover was so deep that even a slight miscalculation could bring everything crashing down. As the night of the exchange approached, Danny's mind raced with the possibilities. He would be in the same room as the cartel representatives, witnessing firsthand the meeting that the FBI had been waiting months to uncover. But his anxiety was compounded by a new fear. Danny had heard rumors circulating among Vincent's men that a mole had been discovered in another Mafia family and had met a brutal end. The rumor was vague, but its timing was suspicious. Danny wondered if Tony had been spreading it intentionally to see if anyone would show signs of guilt or hesitation. The thought of his own potential exposure was unnerving. He spent hours alone, rehearsing every step he would take during the exchange, mentally preparing for the possibility of being questioned or confronted. He practiced appearing relaxed, though inside he felt anything but calm. The double life he led had begun to chip away at him, and his sense of self was fracturing under the strain of secrecy and danger. Each day he felt the weight of Vincent's world pressing down on him, the cold reality of what would happen if he failed the FBI or if Vincent ever suspected his true intentions. On the night of the exchange, Danny arrived at the warehouse, steeling himself for what lay ahead. The warehouse was dimly lit, and he could make out the silhouettes of the other men, each one watching him and each other. He scanned the room, absorbing every detail, knowing he had to document as much as he could for his FBI contact. His heart pounded, but he masked his anxiety with a steely gaze. This was the moment he had worked toward, the opportunity that could expose Vincent's operations on a global scale. But it was also the moment he had dreaded, where one wrong move could mean the end of everything. As he stood among Vincent's trusted men, awaiting the arrival of the cartel representatives, Danny was keenly aware of the razor-thin line he was walking. This mission would either bring him closer to achieving his goal or mark the beginning of a dangerous unraveling, one that could lead to deadly consequences. As Danny Russo stood in the dimly lit warehouse, surrounded by Vincent Bellino's most trusted men, he felt the full weight of his double life pressing down on him. His heartbeat echoed in his ears, each thump a reminder of the fine line he was walking between loyalty and betrayal, life and death. The air was thick with tension as they awaited the arrival of the South American cartel representatives, and Danny could feel the watchful eyes of Tony, Vincent's enforcer, on him. He could sense Tony's growing suspicion, an invisible pressure that made him hyper-aware of every movement, every glance. The cartel members finally arrived, their presence marked by a fleet of dark vehicles that pulled into the warehouse. The cartel's leader, a cold-eyed man named Miguel Alvarez, entered first, his presence filling the room with a menacing aura. Danny knew this was the kind of man who wouldn't hesitate to kill anyone who crossed him. As Miguel and Vincent greeted each other with calculated pleasantries, Danny positioned himself in the background, listening carefully, hoping to gather critical information that the FBI could use to dismantle Vincent's network. The exchange began, and Danny watched as cases of weapons were opened for inspection, followed by stacks of cash being presented by the cartel. Danny tried to mentally catalog every detail: serial numbers, brands, even the expressions on the men's faces. His training had prepared him for this, but nothing could have fully readied him for the tension of standing amidst such a dangerous group, knowing that a single misstep could spell his end. As the transaction unfolded, Tony, who had been hovering near Danny, finally spoke up. His tone was casual, but Danny could feel the sharpness behind his words as he asked pointedly why Danny had been asking so many questions about the exchange. Danny's stomach dropped, but he forced himself to remain calm, offering a plausible explanation he'd rehearsed in case such a moment arrived. The others watched, the silence in the room growing heavier, and Danny sensed that he was standing on a precipice. Tony's eyes narrowed as if searching for cracks in Danny's story, and for a moment Danny thought his cover might be blown. Before Tony could press further, Vincent intervened, dismissing Tony's concerns with a wave of his hand. He seemed satisfied with Danny's loyalty, unaware that the man he trusted was actually an FBI agent infiltrating his entire operation. But Danny knew this close call was a warning, a reminder of how dangerously exposed he was. He also realized that he couldn't keep playing both sides for much longer. The time was coming when he would have to act or risk being discovered. With the deal concluded, the cartel departed, leaving Vincent and his men alone in the warehouse. Vincent, pleased with how smoothly everything had gone, invited his men to join him in a celebratory drink back at his private club. Danny accepted the invitation, knowing it would look suspicious if he declined. As they toasted to the deal, Danny's mind was racing with the information he'd gathered. He knew this intel could take down not only Vincent's organization but also disrupt the cartel's operations, creating a ripple effect that would strike at the heart of international crime syndicates. But he was also acutely aware that time was running out. Later that night, Danny met with his FBI contact to pass along the critical information. The agent commended him, emphasizing that this was exactly the breakthrough they'd been waiting for, and they assured Danny that his work would soon be over. The FBI promised that Vincent's organization would be raided within the week and that Danny would be safely extracted. But Danny felt a growing sense of dread, knowing how volatile Vincent could be. He wondered if Vincent or Tony had suspected more than they let on. If so, any delay in his extraction could be fatal. 2 days before the planned raid, Danny's worst fear materialized. He received a call from Tony, who instructed him to meet at an undisclosed location. The tone in Tony's voice was ominous, and Danny sensed it was a setup. He couldn't back out now, as it would confirm Tony's suspicions. Danny prepared himself, mentally reviewing his exit strategies, hoping he would have a chance to escape if things went wrong. At the meeting place, an abandoned industrial yard, Tony and a few of Vincent's men were waiting. They cornered Danny, and Tony began pressing him with questions, probing his every answer. The intensity of the interrogation escalated, and it became clear that Tony had pieced together enough to know Danny was hiding something. In a final moment of desperation, Danny attempted to convince them of his loyalty, but Tony's mind was set. Just as things were about to turn violent, the sound of sirens filled the air. FBI agents arrived, swarming the location, having traced Danny's whereabouts through a tracking device. A tense standoff ensued, with Vincent's men attempting to flee. In the chaos, Danny managed to slip away, narrowly escaping with his life. The raid was successful in dismantling much of Vincent's operation, but Vincent himself slipped through the cracks, vanishing without a trace. In the aftermath, Danny was left to reckon with the emotional toll of his mission. He had infiltrated one of the most dangerous crime syndicates in the country and brought critical information to the FBI, but he had sacrificed part of himself in the process. His undercover role had demanded a constant betrayal of the people around him, blurring his own identity and leaving him feeling as much a ghost as a hero. In the end, he had achieved his mission, but the cost of his deception weighed heavily on him. He had brought down a criminal empire, but he knew he would carry the scars of his double life forever.